when they don't use the microphone here? Where is it going?
It's going out to
Oh, it's going. So if they don't use this microphone, it's really hard for them to hear. Got it.
It's a great microphone, but as soon as you turn away this little microphone, it's not so great.
Okay, fair enough.
But I can hear you. So as long as I'm here, that's good. But
What? Oh, it is. Okay.
hey, Christy.
Yeah?
Did you guys not want people to bring food in here? Okay. You might want to make an announcement there. Okay.
Do it through this little. Hopefully come out over there.
We didn't mix the sound
No,
because we had a deal.
it's coming through streaming.
Okay.
We're about to find out if it goes through streaming. We're about to find that out.
Okay.
So yes, I'm gonna make an announcement.
Want me to listen?
I think Peggy's gone there.
All right. Just because people are coming to our office saying we need more chairs.
Yeah, I know. Greetings. Can you hear me in the other room? Okay, so they can't hear me, so that probably means something's going on. They can't hear me, but it's probably not you. It's probably the computer there.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Oh, now I can hear.
It's about a minute and a half delay.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you all for coming to this lunch. We're super excited to have you here. The seating, we know that there's not enough seating in the lunchroom, so if you want to, you are welcome to go out into the lobby or come into the room where we will have the keynote, which is right next door, so wherever you need to go, but just wander around and find a nice place to eat. When you are finished, please take your plates and any leftover food to the sustainability group where they have all of the recycling and the composting bins. So look for somebody with a Shepard Symposium t-shirt on if they have any questions. And thanks again for coming. It's really weird to do that to people who like. It's fine. This is just it's fine. It's not a problem at all.
shelf right here. I see. And she can put her laptop because she's not going to show, but she needs it to read something off.
Yeah, here. There you go.
It's too big of a
Just
cup.
put it right there. Does it not fit?
Let me see. Oh, too big. Or
There's big tables we could put up here. I don't see a little one though.
should have gotten a small cup.
Apparently.
Or maybe transfer it to the metal cup you have there.
We have the metal. We have some other ones in there, and they're shorter. I think. I think they're shorter. If there's some left in there.
Let me bring the metal cup.
Okay.
I think that's some.
So if everyone can start working their way into the central ballroom, we're going to get started pretty quickly here. So please find a seat. There's lots of seats towards the front. Work your way in. Thank you very much.
Try and keep fairly close to that microphone.
Okay. I'm just presenting the speaker. I'm not the
Okay.
speaker.
All right. It's going to go out to the stream.
Okay.
Oh, do we have everything set?
Yeah, I think I have water. Just be careful. This is hot. I'll tell you that just touch the edges.
Oh, yeah, this isn't the best thing for
No,
heat.
because this is too tall for that.
Okay, we do have coffee mugs if you'd rather. We have.
Transfer it to a coffee.
Yeah, just so she doesn't burn herself.
Okay. Yes, we don't want to burn.
Yeah.
Well, let me transfer it.
Well, we can tell her. I just don't want.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell her to grab from. I don't know. I think we should transfer it.
Yeah.
Actually,
Okay. Let me take.
I'll hand it to you. Can you grab it?
Yeah.
Are you good? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Ah, very good. Now you can hear me. Now that I'm screaming. Hello, welcome, everyone. Welcome to Shepard Symposium, 20th anniversary. Exactly. So I'm thrilled that we've had such a big crowd this morning. Have you guys been having a wonderful time? Those of you who've been going to sessions? Yes? Good, good. As you know, those of you who just enjoyed lunch, did you enjoy your vegan lunch? Good, good. Are you still enjoying your vegan lunch? That's fine. Okay. So I'm Michelle Jarman. I'm co-chair of the Shepard Symposium this year with Christy Boggs, who will be up here shortly with me. We are thrilled to be celebrating the 20th anniversary of Shepard Symposium. We have a massive lineup for you this year. Many of you may have been at our keynote last night with Rebecca Peabody and at the Art Museum. The Kara Walker exhibit is extraordinary, and her talk was amazing. If you weren't able to go, please do enjoy the exhibit, because it will still be up until May 15th. It's really quite powerful. It's customary at this juncture for us to remind ourselves of why we come together every year at the Shepard Symposium. So I'm going to take a few moments to share that history again with us and kind of bring us together in this space of social justice. 20 years ago, in the 1996-97 academic year, Omowale Akuntinda and Peggy Cooney from the College of Education here at UW started the symposium, and they called it the Symposium for the Eradication of Social Inequality. Their mission at that point was to start a dialogue between faculty, staff, students, and the greater community on issues of social justice in the context of education. In 1998, as many of you remember, Matthew Shepard was beaten and left for dead on the outskirts of Laramie. Only days later would he pass away as a result of his injuries. The University of Wyoming, Laramie, and the country were outraged that this young man had been killed for being himself, for being gay. Matt Shepard is remembered as being not only a UW student, but for being a social activist. In 2002, the Symposium for the Eradication of Social Inequality changed its title to bear Matt's name. And this is a living reminder that life is precious and meaningful. It's in his name that we work every year to build a program and continue the dialogue around issues of inequality, social justice, diversity, and change. I remember seeing Angela Jaime, who used to chair this symposium, kind of break up every time she would read this statement, and I thought, I wouldn't, but here I am doing it, and get a little teary, sorry. So I also want to remember and help us all remember that the Shepard Symposium is supported by an anonymous donor. We don't know much about this donor, but I want to remember him now. He was a hard worker for the Union Pacific Railroad, and he invested his money well. He was not a graduate of UW. He was a frugal man and sometimes lived in a small cabin on a piece of land west of Wheatland, Wyoming. He was a fan of film, Morris D., and the Southern Poverty Law Center. His first major gift to the University of Wyoming was an addition to the original Fine Arts Center, which allowed the Department of Theater and Dance to host annual film festival and teach acting for the camera. But when Matt Shepard was murdered, this donor was particularly disturbed by the brutality and senselessness of the loss. So he established the generous gift to the University of Wyoming to endow this symposium in memory of Matt Shepard. So this donor has since passed away, but we all want to remember, and we tell his story every year in gratitude for his courage and compassion. So again, this year marks the 20th anniversary. It's a great honor to be a part of this incredible symposium. I want to share with you, this is our logo for this year. What we tried to do is go back to the archives and find a small image from the posters from the last 20 years. We had a lot of fun uncovering all of these. There are a few of them. We feel like we found nearly all of them. Many of you may remember them, but we encourage you to buy a commemorative t-shirt. We're using the money raised for the t-shirt sales as a fundraiser for Runner Girl, a wonderful local group. And we are also launching this year a new logo for Shepard Symposium. For those of you who have water bottles, hold them in the air. This is the new logo, my friends. Yes. Enjoy your wonderful water bottle. And it's also on the front of this t-shirt. This logo, we wanted our winner who, he kind of designed the logo that we then gave to our graphic artist and said, toy with this a little bit and really make it a great logo. But Kevin Fattel is a student here at UW, and we will recognize him tomorrow when he's able to join us. But wanted to tell you that. Now I want to quickly, before we introduce our wonderful speaker this afternoon, remind you that the Shepard Symposium keeps on going for the next few days, okay? So we have a wonderful keynote coming up with Masha Gessen, who we'll bring up shortly. We have Janaya Khan, a global ambassador for the Black Lives Matter movement, who will speak to us at 4 p.m. today. Janaya is actually deeply involved with issues going on in Toronto right now, so they're coming to be with us in the midst of this activism going on in their city. Tomorrow, we have continuing sessions, and we welcome back one of the co-founders of Shepard Symposium, Omowale Akintunde. He's an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker. He's going to give an incredible keynote at the noon hour tomorrow. On Friday, for those of you who love comedians, Mohammed Bilal is coming. Friday Night Fever has organized this in conjunction with Shepard, so don't miss that event. Saturday, we have the Gay Straight Alliance Day. This has been shepherded by the one and only Nick Jesse. He and his committee have really created a whole day of programming. They've reached out to high schools across Wyoming and the region, and many of these high school students are coming. We really encourage UW students to come, to meet these students, to welcome them, to talk to them, to hear their stories. We want to be a resource for them. So we're very excited about that. And then we have a phenomenal dance planned at the Depot, so don't miss that on Saturday night, okay? I'm going to welcome up Christy Boggs, my co-chair.
And in case you haven't noticed, we're like going the extremes. She's got all black, I've got on white. She's really tall, I'm really short. I'm not sure why that's happening, but
Tell us apart.
We want to make sure you can tell us apart. First thing I want to do actually is actually thank our committee. We really, none of this actually would happen. Michelle and I are kind of, you know, idea people and stuff, and people have to actually do stuff, and that's not always us. And so if you have worked on the committee this year, I guess I should say, can you please stand up or gesture in some way, please?
We want to recognize you.
Stand up.
Wave your arms.
Wave your arms. These are the people that are really making this happen. You can also look for the t-shirts like the one that Michelle has on here, and I have on too under my jacket. These are the people that you can ask questions from. Either they will know the answer or they will know who will know the answer. So these are the people you want to really find and ask questions from. I also want to give a special thank you to Peggy McCracken, who's standing in the back, right back there. Peggy has done a lion's share of this work, and so, you know, she's really, really, really done an amazing amount of this work, and the fact that you had food and the fact that, you know, that there's things happening at all pretty much are mostly due to Peggy. So if you see her around, thank her very much for that. I also want to actually, as we're thanking our committee members, we had an especially exciting thing this year is that we asked 2 student RSOs this year to help us with some of the events that are happening with the Shepard Symposium. Michelle and I really wanted to bring in, have a stronger sense for both disabilities as well as sustainability for this conference, to try to bring in more of the social justice issues of our time. And so we had the Abilities RSO on campus come and help us make this event accessible. And so I think we were going to have the students talk, but they're not here right now. So Michelle's going to talk to that a little bit. So you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so just briefly, and I run the Disability Studies minor. This is a very big issue for me, but it's been exciting to see the students lead the initiative. So you see our transcriptionist here. You see transcribers in most of our meeting rooms. We're just trying to be very mindful of making the event as accessible as possible. So just noticing the space, if anyone needs to access the screen for transcription, please, you know, there are seats up here. You can move around, make sure you can see the transcription. This is going on in all of our meeting rooms, and so we're also, you see, kind of pulled out chairs. We're trying to make the seating more integrated, so if people are using wheelchairs, they don't have to be sitting in the back or the front. We're trying to make spaces more flexible. Other things we're doing, we have a lot of large print schedules in the front. We're just trying to be very mindful. And so also, if anyone has an access request that we're not thinking of, let us know. We can plan for next year and tell us how this is working for you. We're very interested. So we want to thank Abilities for all their work on that.
And then the other RSO that we worked with was the Sustainability Club, and the president of the Sustainability, wow, that's hard to say. Sustainability Club is Megan Cranford, and she's going to tell you a little bit about what she's done.
Hey everybody. I just want to take a second and thank you all for being cooperative and enthusiastic about trying to host a zero waste event. Like Christy has said and Michelle said, we're trying to incorporate sustainability more into this conference. So this is a great social justice conference, and we also want to attack the environmental sustainability side of things. And so I just wanted to encourage all of you to bring back your mugs and your water bottles and your cups and use them all throughout the conference. And also, if you're off-site and going to get coffee or you go downstairs, use your mugs and your water bottles to fill up and bring those back, and also encourage other people to do the same. So I just wanted to thank you guys, and I hope you're enjoying your time here.
All these tall people surround me in my life. Okay, so I'm going to read this. We do have a fantastic grant that, an endowment that Michelle talked about, but we also get a lot of support around campus and around the community. So I just want to read through them. They're also coming up here as well, but I'm going to read through all of the people that help make this happen financially, because this is a big event, and the fact that we can continue to make it free to allow access to as many people as possible is really important to us. So I'm just going to read through them. The College of Arts and Sciences, the College of Education, the College of Engineering, the Outreach School, the Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Educational Studies, Department of Gender and Women's Studies, Department of Social Work, the Albogan Center for Teaching and Learning, Social Justice Research Center, the Wyoming Institute for Disabilities, the Wyoming School-University Partnership, UW Friday Night Fever and the Campus Activity Center, Big Hollow Food Co-op, Cowgirl Yarn, Cross Country Connection, the Herb House, the Pedal House, the UW Art Museum, and the Palladium Hair Studio all gave us donations for either the raffle or for the, actually gave us financial donations. Actually, I also got one, the College of Agriculture just sent one in today. So, and I didn't get them on the list yet, but the College of Agriculture did as well. So let's thank those sponsors for us real quick. All right, and now I know that you did not come here to listen to Michelle and I talk. I know you came to hear Masha talk, and we're really, really super excited to have her come. What we've asked is one of our committee members came to the first meeting. Is like, I have somebody I want to bring, and we're like, yeah, okay. It was like really early, and she was so excited, and so we're really pleased that we were able to get her to come. And I'm going to have Maria Kutsanova actually introduce Masha, because I feel like she would do a much better job than I would. So Maria is actually a faculty member at UW Casper in psychology, and she's going to do the introduction. So thank you, Maria.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is with great pleasure I'm introducing to you the award-winning journalist, Masha Gessen. She is a Russian-American journalist that started her career in the gay and lesbian press in the United States in the 1980s. Then she returned back to Russia as a correspondent and stayed there for 20 years until the anti-gay campaign forced her to leave Russia. She is the author of 7 books of nonfiction, most recently The Brothers, The Road to American Tragedy, as well as their international bestseller, The Man Without the Face, The Unlikely Rise of Vladimir Putin. In 2013, she co-edited Gay Propaganda, Russian Love Stories. It's a bilingual collection of personal narratives. Gessen is currently a Carnegie Millennial Fellow, and she's also currently working on another book. So, Masha.
Thank you. Okay. A little bit of housekeeping. All right. There we go. Sorry. But let me start. It means so much for me to be here, and I think you'll find out why soon. When I was getting ready to speak, I didn't actually think that I was going to start with a story that has as much to do with the topic or the history of this symposium as it's going to. But I am going to start with a story, it's a story of a journalist who was murdered in St. Petersburg last week. And it's an unusual thing to have happen in St. Petersburg, not the murder. Murders happen in Russia all the time. It's a country of various and varied violence, and there are different kinds of violence that we recognize. What was unusual was that a journalist was murdered and no one called for a full investigation. No one said, we have to find the murderer. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that, I didn't know this man. We have a bunch of friends in common, but I didn't actually know him personally. But as soon as I saw the way people were reacting to the death on social media, I thought, oh, another one. Because, you know, there's a fine art to reading obituaries. There were, any of us who lived through the AIDS epidemic in the United States and was paying attention knows that there was, you would see an obituary in a newspaper, a local newspaper or a national newspaper, and if it was for a young man, and it didn't mention cause of death, or it said that he died of respiratory failure, which basically means he stopped breathing, then you knew he died of AIDS. And if the obituary said that there was a longtime companion, then you really knew he died of AIDS. And the equivalent in contemporary Russia is an obituary that says that a man was found murdered in his own apartment and there was no sign of forced entry. And when this happens to someone well known enough to warrant numerous written remembrances, the writers usually refer to them not to a murder, but to a tragic death, as though it weren't a murderer who caused the death, but some sort of character flaw. And what they mean is that the man who died was gay, and he apparently died at the hands of someone he brought home. No one knows how often this happens. There are no statistics, there's nothing out in the open, but it happens often enough that I think everyone I know knows someone who was killed that way. I know people who were killed that way, more than one. And I also know someone who decided 3 years ago, when the anti-gay campaign in Russia began, now it's almost 4 years ago, he decided that he was going to come out in a magazine in Moscow, a big city magazine. It was a huge thing to do, and the magazine decided to publish a special issue for which they were asking people who'd never been out in any public way to come out for the first time in the magazine. So they found 28 people willing to do this. And one of the people they found is someone I have since met, and he started writing to me while he was getting ready to do this interview. His name was Alexander Smirnov, and he was an official with the Moscow government. He knew that coming out was going to cost him his job, but he felt it was very important. It was very important specifically for this passage that he took a long time preparing. This is how it reads. 2 years ago, someone I knew died. He was found in his apartment, naked, stabbed to death. He was gay. You know how this happens? Gays often meet one another online, and there are whole gangs that come to gay men's houses, then kill them and rob their apartment. Their families conceal the stories, of course. So when this friend of Smirnov's was murdered, a female friend of his begged him to be careful. She said, you know, please don't meet anybody online, please don't bring anybody you don't know home. But what was he supposed to do? He's a closeted gay man. He was afraid to go to any public space in Moscow. There are very few public spaces. There were a few back then. There are fewer now as a result of the anti-gay campaign. But you know, he was afraid to go to the clubs or the bars and meet people there because he'd be seen there. He was an official with the Moscow government. He was even afraid to meet someone online and meet that person in public. So he had no choice but to let someone into his house. And of course it happened to him. There was a man that he arranged to meet. The man came with someone else. They forced their way, after he opened the door, they forced their way into the apartment. And this is what he says. I was bleeding out, feeling that I was about to lose consciousness. I begged to be allowed to live. You cannot imagine how ashamed I feel. They are the ones who barged into my home and nearly killed me. They took everything I had, including even my phone. They're the ones who committed the crime, and I'm the one who's ashamed. I was shaking, but I couldn't call an ambulance because I would have had to explain what had happened. And of course, I couldn't say anything at work. I had my friends call my office and say that I'd been attacked at a bus stop. I didn't go to the police. It would have been easy to find my attackers, but I didn't have the strength to talk to the people in uniform. Now I blame myself for being weak, because those two can go on to kill someone else. Soon after this interview was published, Smirnov was fired from his job. He left the country. He's now living in New York City, and he's applied for asylum in the United States. And what he was describing is this double stigma that attaches to people who are found dead in their own apartments with no sign of forced entry, because the part of the stigma has to do with the man being gay. Part of it, of course, has to do with the fact that he was killed by someone that he brought home himself for either anonymous or casual sex. If that is exposed, that will further stigmatize the family. So, for example, about 10 years ago, when a prominent journalist named Ilya Zimin was found in murdered in his apartment in Moscow, and his colleagues, who didn't know the fine art of reading the obituaries, his colleagues called for a full investigation. And what started really destroyed his family. Just one tabloid newspaper published a news, and this is the biggest tabloid newspaper in the country with a print run of about 400,000. So there was an expose in the newspaper called "Rumors of His Non-Traditional Orientation Haunted Zimin Back When He Was a College Student," with quotes from people who'd gone to college with him about how he was an outcast. So when this St. Petersburg journalist was killed last week, his friends wrote things like, "There can't be that many versions of what happened, but I will not explore them." Or, "There are details, but I will not go into them." People wrote similar tactful phrases after the deaths of well-known actress Vyacheslav Titov, who was found dead in his apartment in Moscow in December 2011. Another well-known actor named Alexei Devotchenko, who was found in a pool of his own blood in his own apartment in Moscow in November 2014. And what no one has written in response to any of these deaths is that the Kremlin's anti-gay campaign, which simultaneously pushes people underground and communicates to the public that homophobic violence will go unpunished, ensures that these shameful murders continue. I actually just learned this morning that someone has been arrested in the St. Petersburg case. It's a 21-year-old man whom the victim met online. He brought him home. The man murdered him and took his valuables. And he was found because he was carrying his valuables out in the open, which just goes to show how much he was counting on impunity. And the amazing thing is that, while it is obviously a hate crime, there has been no outrage in Russia. The coverage is very sort of matter of fact, someone has been arrested, the murder has been solved. And there's no conversation about the nature of the crime, because that conversation would be so difficult to have. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to run through the history, the very short history of the Russian anti-gay campaign, and then try to put it in a global context. So this started, when it started actually years ago, I thought it was funny. I thought it was sort of quaint. A couple of Russian cities, small cities, started passing legislation that would ban propaganda of homosexuality. And I thought, that's so cute. That's like the last time I heard that was in the US in the late 1970s during the Anita Bryant campaign. They're so old-fashioned. But they passed their legislation. And then that legislation was slowly making it up to the federal level. It went from smaller cities to larger cities. It was passed in St. Petersburg, which is the second largest city in the country. And then it was introduced on the federal level. And a friend of mine Facebook messaged me, "I'm worried about you because you've got kids and you could be accused of homosexual propaganda to minors." And I thought, oh my God. Like, I really had not taken it seriously up until that point. There are lots of weird, awful laws that are passed in Russia, especially on the local level. But this particular one had traction. And it had traction because Vladimir Putin, the president, who was coming back for his third term in office, was looking for a way to discredit the protesters. And queerbaiting is a great, tried and true way to discredit people, to mark them as other. And so that's when the campaign really began in earnest. And it began in, the legislation was introduced on the federal level in March 2012, which is exactly the month that Putin began his crackdown. It was when he was re-elected for the third time. And what was propaganda of homosexuality to minors? The Constitutional Court of Russia defined it as follows, and I've obviously committed this to memory. It is the goal-directed and uncontrolled distribution of information that can cause harm to the spiritual or physical development of children, including forming in them their erroneous impression of social equality, of traditional and non-traditional sexual relations. Right? So there are two parts to how special this law is. And part of it has to do with sort of what totalitarian or totalitarian-like societies, which is the topic of my current book, but I'm not going to go into that, but let's just call it a totalitarian-like society, there's something that they do, which is that they pass laws. They're intentionally vague. They're so vague that they can never be applied uniformly, right? They can only be applied selectively. That's the point of those laws. The point of those laws is to make as many people be in breach of the laws and to place as many people outside the law as possible, and then have them live in dread because the law can be enforced against them at any time. So that's part of that law. You know, obviously, anybody and nobody could be considered guilty under this law against homosexual propaganda. But there's another part to this law that I think in some ways is even more important, which is this business about the illusion of social equality, right? It's a law that, as far as I know, or certainly in Europe, for the first time since Germany in the 1930s, actually enshrines second-class citizenship in law. It actually makes it a crime to say that one kind of person, one kind of relationship is equal to another, right? In my particular case, technically, it would have made it a crime for me to tell my children or to give my children the erroneous impression that our family was no worse than the neighbor's family, right? So, in addition to that law, which was, it was in Parliament for a little over a year, there was a lot of international protest. Russia likes to drag its feet when there's a lot of international attention. So it passed the law slowly. Also, another very special thing about a society like Russia today is that you don't actually have to pass the law in order for the law to start working, right? Because it's a messaging system. And the signal was out there even though the parliament hadn't voted on it in all the required readings. So the second law that was passed in June 2013, just a few days after the law on homosexual propaganda was passed in its final reading, was a total ban on adoption by same-sex couples or single people from families, single people from countries where same-sex marriage is legal, right? And it was largely a symbolic law because by that point, Russia had effectively banned all foreign adoptions, right? So again, it was a signal, but it is sometimes applied, and it's applied in truly bizarre ways. For example, so foreign citizens, people who are just citizens of foreign countries, basically cannot adopt Russian children anymore. But of course, there are lots of Russian citizens who live abroad. So recently, a couple, two Russian citizens who live in Germany, went to adopt an orphan from Russia, and they knew about this law. So they actually went and got a doctor's certificate of heterosexuality, and they submitted it to the court. And the court said that's not good enough, because the divorce rate in Germany is pretty high. You could conceivably get divorced, and after you get divorced, one of you or both of you could become a homosexual, making these children vulnerable, and they were denied their adoption. It's also a law that, the law on adoption, it's also a law that can be used retroactively, right? Adoptions are banned, so the state can invalidate any adoption. This was the reason my family had to leave the country, because my oldest son is adopted. And even though he had been in the family since he was 2.5 years old, and he was already a high school student, his adoption could be invalidated. And when I contacted a lawyer to ask him what I should do about it, he said the answer to your question is at the airport. So 3 days after the law was passed, my son was on a plane to the United States to start boarding school here, and then we joined him a few months later. But that was not enough. The head of the Parliament Committee on the Family told the press that she was going to make sure that a mechanism for removing children from same-sex families would be created, even for children who were not adopted. And that law, that bill, it's not a law, that bill was filed in Parliament in September 2013. It has not been passed, but it can be dug up and voted on at any point. And again, in a society like Russia, you don't actually have to pass the laws. You just have to signal that a law like this is possible. What I mean by that is that social services have been going after families that they identify as same-sex. For example, there was a court case just outside of Moscow, and most of these cases I would never find out about, because what people most want to do is get rid of these cases and not drawing attention to them. Drawing attention to them is tantamount to acknowledging that, yes, you are a same-sex family. And then there's no way to win the case, even though there's no law, right? So what people try to do is they try to deny that they're queer, and try to win their cases this way. So I know of a few cases. One of them went like this. There was a lesbian couple in a small town just outside of Moscow, and they're this really great couple. They'd been friends since their children were, they had children the same age. They've been friends since right around the time their children were born. They were both married to men. Then they started having a relationship. Then they moved in together. The relationship among all four people in this configuration was actually very good. Everybody was friends. The guys sort of still got dinners cooked for them, and they got to visit with their kids, and everybody was kind of happy with this thing until it became a topic of public conversation. And then the parents-in-law said to one of the fathers, you know, aren't you outraged that that your child is being raised by these two lesbians? And all of a sudden he was outraged. And the parents, one of the parents-in-law is a local official, so she had social services on the case immediately, and the social services filed a 14-page brief with the court saying that being raised by two women was going to do irreparable damage to the 7-year-old boy. They won the case because they had a really excellent lesbian lawyer, and who proved that they were not lesbians. And then they made peace with the ex-husband, which was really the key component. If he'd insisted, they would have lost the kid. In another case, things didn't end quite so well. A gay male couple, also living just outside of Moscow, they had twins by a surrogate. The twins were about a year. These twin girls were about a year and a half old, when all of a sudden the surrogate shows up again, accompanied by social services, who had dug her up and asked her to file a claim to get for custody of the children, the two men went into hiding and fled the country. And fortunately, they were able to keep their family intact, but by losing their home. What's been really tragic is what's happened to trans people in Russia. There were a lot of families in which one of the partners had transitioned, and there was shared custody, and sort of things were working, right? And as soon as the anti-gay campaign began and this sexuality and gender became a topic of public conversation, and the Kremlin marked these people as enemies, transgender people started losing custody, one after another, and the courts always rule against them. They cannot say that they're not transgender because it is evident, and there are medical records, and there's all sorts of proof, and they lose every single time. And it's just a typical story. And if I meet a transgender person in Russia these days, and I find out that they were previously married heterosexually and have children, I know what's going to follow. I know what's going to follow is a story of losing custody, and often a protracted fight and this sort of barely surviving hope of seeing the child again. But this was not all. The Russian parliament keeps working. So at the moment, it has two more bills that are pending. One bill is a bill that would ban all outward expressions of homosexuality. What is an outward expression of homosexuality? Well, like I said, you just place everybody in breach of the law, and then you can use homosexuality against anybody. And homosexuality becomes a concept, right? It's not a life, it's not a person, it's not an attribute of character, it's just a thing, right? It's the thing that marks people as the enemy. It's like calling somebody in the 1930s in Russia, calling somebody a Japanese spy or an enemy of the people. So that's what homosexuals are now. For example, I know someone, a straight man, as it happens, who was prosecuted in St. Petersburg under the then local legislation in 2011 for propaganda of homosexuality for wearing rainbow suspenders during a protest march. It's really funny, except the guy had to go into hiding for 6 months. And I don't know what's happened to him. I think he's left the country. So outward expression of homosexuality would essentially ban, it would ban all, obviously all pride parades, not that they're legal now, but the European Court on Human Rights has ruled that Moscow's consistent refusal to give out permits for pride parades, which it's done annually, it's denied these permits annually, is a violation. Russia is obligated to, by treaty, to comply with the decisions of the European Court on Human Rights. But a Moscow court, in response to this European Court on Human Rights decision, ruled that pride parades were banned in Moscow for the next 100 years. I don't know why they didn't ban them in perpetuity. So what happens is that once a year, a group of very brave people goes out in Moscow for usually a few seconds, enough to raise their banners, and then they get beaten up by thugs, and then they get arrested, right? And the thugs are not arrested. So the parliament has taken one vote on the ban on the outward expression of homosexuality. The vote was in February. The bill did not pass. That's the good news. The bad news is nobody voted against it. They just didn't get a quorum. Not one person in the entire Russian parliament voted against this bill that would make it a crime to express homosexuality. So it can, because they didn't have a quorum, it can come up at any point. And again, it's a signal. And just going back for a second to June 2013, one member of the Russian parliament, one out of 425 people, voted against the ban on homosexual propaganda, and he later said that he had pushed the wrong button by mistake. So, and there's another bill that's pending in the Russian parliament, and I think it has every chance of being passed. It's a bill that would ban transsexuals from marrying, right? Because the Russian officials have figured out that there's a sort of loophole in this picture of gender conformity that they're trying to force onto the country. There are people who have transitioned legally, who may marry people who used to be the same sex as they were, or there are people who have not transitioned legally, who are in the process of transitioning, who might marry people who look like they're the same gender as they're, and who identify as being the same gender as they're. And Russian queer activists, bless their hearts, have been taking advantage of this ability to sort of to show that there are legal ways to confront the government. There have been a couple of beautiful public weddings, one in St. Petersburg, during which a transgender woman married a cis woman, and because the transgender woman had documents that had a man's name on them and that identified her gender as male, they were able to marry. They both wore beautiful white wedding dresses to the registration office. They called the media to come and photograph them. It was gorgeous, and after they got married, the parliament immediately filed this bill that would outlaw marriage for transsexuals. I'm not sure how they would fight the case of a transgender person who hasn't legally transitioned with this law. So they're probably going to amend it in some way, and then finally put it up for a vote. So when the bill was pending, a couple in Moscow went to the registration office. Their case is similar but more complicated. So one of them is transgender, is transitioning from male to female. The other one is genderqueer, and in their relationship identifies as male, but she's a cis woman. Their documents were in order. They looked as queer as anybody can look, and they came with a bunch of friends, and they were wearing rainbow flags because, of course, carrying rainbow flags would probably look like an illegal demonstration. They would immediately get arrested, so they were wearing rainbow flags. And the registration office didn't know what to do with them. This was just a couple of weeks ago, and so they were stopped at the entrance to the registration office. And the way these registration offices look in Russia is, and Russia was sort of the Soviet Union was always trying to figure out its relationship to family and the institution of marriage, because first they outlawed it, then they sort of re-sanctified it. And so these registration offices, they're a cross between a bureaucratic office and a chapel, generally, and they look very official, but they're also like an assembly line. It's a little bit like getting married at New York City Hall, which I've done, and it's there's like this stream of couples. Some of them look like they just ran in from work to get their papers really quickly, and some of them are wearing the high wedding gear and bottles of champagne. So same sort of thing at the registration office. So this flow is disrupted by these people who come in wrapped in rainbow flags. And the registration office says, well, you have to stop your manifestation. You have to take off all of this stuff. And they say, well, what do you want us to do? Go in naked? So then they close the doors and they go back for consultations, and they come back out again, and they said, okay, you can go in, just the couple can go in, and we'll give you your certificate of marriage. So they were outraged. Why does everybody have a ceremony? They can have a string quartet playing and all sorts of things, and all we get is a certificate issued behind closed doors. At the same time, they really wanted to get married. So finally they said, okay, we'll get the certificate behind closed doors. It was still a beautiful picture for the media, and I think it was a gorgeous protest. And I think that it unfortunately increased the chances of this legislation that will ban marriage for transsexuals and transgender people, that it will become law. So what I've been describing right, is absurd in some ways and really tragic in some ways. But, you know, there's a consistent narrative of creating second-class citizenship. It begins with this idea of social equality, the illusion of social equality. And then it goes to taking rights away from people, right? So it's a little different than what we've seen in the past in the battle for LGBT equality, where people are denied rights that they haven't had, right? And often there's a step back after after there's a step forward for the LGBT rights movement. But we've never seen sort of a concerted effort to strip people of rights, sort of bit by bit, law by law. Well, we have seen it. We saw it in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, when Jews were, you know, lost the right to hold certain jobs, lost the right to walk certain streets, lost the right to ride bicycles, you know, that sort of thing. And I think if I were talking about it at a symposium like this in 1935, it would also sound alternately scary and really hilariously funny, because, you know, how can you take somebody's right to ride a bicycle away? But that's the sort of thing that we're watching. And the reasons that Russia is doing it are because a country in the process of a political crackdown needs a scapegoat minority. And the gays seemed like a really good scapegoat minority. And there are some reasons that are specific to Russia that make the gays a good scapegoat minority, but there are also some broader reasons that apply to the rest of the world, or many other countries in the world. So what Russia says is that, look, you know, there were no gays and lesbians in Russia before the Soviet Union collapsed. Which is always a laugh line, but it's actually true. Right? There were people in the Soviet Union who loved people of the same sex. There were people who had sex with people of the same sex. There were people who formed very interesting relationships and very interesting family constructions. But there weren't people who said, I'm a member of a group. I have a particular identity that signifies my belonging to a group. Certain rights accrue to me as a member of this group. Right? Nobody said that. That understanding came in the 1990s from the West after the Soviet Union collapsed. And it's very easy to, it's easy to say anything to a population when you control television and television goes out to 98% of the households. But it's particularly easy to sort of say, look, you know, this is something that maybe you've never felt quite comfortable with. And you can stop feeling comfortable with it. You can stop pretending. You can give yourself the freedom to hate. You can give yourself the freedom to engage in violence. You can go and beat them up. And the biggest consequence of all these laws that I've described has been an incredible rise in anti-gay violence. Murders, but also just, you know, beatings and attacks on gay gathering places, and a constant sense of physical unsafety for everybody who is queer in Russia or might be considered queer in Russia. So the other thing that Russia says, and this has become a cornerstone of Russia's war against the West, is that Russia represents the traditional values civilization. And the message is basically as follows. There are two civilizations in the world. One is the Western civilization, which can have its human rights if it believes in them, but it's their problem. Don't force it down our throats. There is nothing universal about human rights, is a key statement of this propaganda campaign. Right? And this is something that gets a lot of traction with a lot of countries. Russia has been in the vanguard of forming the Traditional Values Coalition in the UN, which has been very consistent in either scuttling LGBT rights legislation in the UN or passing certain anti-gay legislation, or it's not legislation in the UN, but statements and resolutions in the United Nations. And Russia forms strategic alliances with other countries And the civilization of traditional values is vast. Right? Russia forms alliances with countries in the Middle East, countries in Africa, countries in Latin America. It can have a tactical alliance with Ecuador one day and a tactical alliance with Uganda another day. Russia has also, and I mentioned Uganda for a reason, Russia has also become a very good sort of repackager and re-exporter of far right-wing rhetoric from the United States. It goes to Russia, it sort of gets new gift packaging, and then goes out to the rest of the world. A lot of satellites, a lot of former Soviet satellites, which have been considering or have passed copycat legislation, and these are countries like Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, Georgia, Moldova. Sometimes their European partners can exert enough pressure on them to stop the legislation, and sometimes they can't. But that message is very much spreading. Russia, in a way, is just the starkest example of things that we see all over the world. Russian legislation, compared to Uganda's or Malaysia's, is not that bad. There are no criminal penalties for homosexual activity. You can't go to jail for having sex. You can go to jail for talking about having sex, but that's a whole different story. But it's, on the face of it, it's a better place to be queer. There are some gathering places. What's special about Russia, and the reason it's become such a stark example, is that Russia was moving forward for so many years before it was suddenly thrown into reverse. And that is a striking thing to watch. It's a really horrible thing to experience, because there are people who have been living openly, maybe not as openly as I have, but they say have a kid, and their neighbors know that they have a kid and they're a couple, and their kid's teacher knows, and their pediatrician knows, and then all of a sudden, the pediatrician says, "I don't think I can treat your child anymore." And the teacher says, "I think we have an issue." And the neighbors say, "We probably need to report you to the authorities." And the next thing you know, they pick up and move, and they come to this country in the hope of getting asylum. And I'm obviously referring to a particular family and a particular story, because all the examples I give are real. And I think that one of the things that have struck me the most since I've been covering this, a few months after coming to this country, I went to speak at a support group for newly arrived LGBT refugees. And or they're not refugees, they're asylum seekers. And I'll go into that in a second. But it was a small group, and people were talking about their stories. They were just going sort of around in a circle, telling their stories briefly. And one after another, people said, "So I come from such and such city, and I got beaten up one too many times, and now I'm in New York." Excuse me, I'm sorry, could you, thank you, yeah. And I got beaten up one too many times, and now I'm in New York and I feel safer. And then somebody else would say, "This is what happened to me, and now I'm in New York and I feel safer." And by like person number 6 or 7, I was thinking, this is unbelievable. I mean, just imagine this, right? You are in a strange country where you don't speak the language, where you don't have any legal status, where you don't have documents to open a bank account, never mind get a job, where you're not home in any way that a person can be home. And you feel safer than you did at home? How did you feel at home then? Right? So that gets me to the topic of refugees. This is what Russia says, and in any propaganda, there's always a small kernel of truth, which is what makes propaganda effective. And what Russia says is basically that there's a worldwide culture war on. And I think to an extent they're right. And the front line in that war is LGBT rights. It's become, and if someone had told me this, 30 years ago when I was working for the gay press in this country, I don't think I could have believed it, that there was, the way countries treat their pride marches and how much violence there is against those who demonstrate, and the way countries treat their queer minorities will become a litmus test of sort of the state of the country and freedoms in that country. But I think that's very much the case these days. So that's a front line in this global culture war. And as within your war, there are refugees from a war. And these people are coming to countries all over the world. Countries have not, by and large, been very good to them. There are a couple of countries that have been consistently good in granting asylum to people who claim persecution on the basis of being a sexual minority. One of those countries, fortunately, is the United States. Another is South Africa. Canada has had a spotty record. Their bar for proving that you're queer seems to be set awfully high, especially for people coming from countries where they have to live underground. And I know of cases of queer people who have been deported back to their countries of origin from Canada. European countries, by and large, I mean, European countries don't grant a lot of political asylum in general, but European countries in general have not been very good. They generally speaking, require people, they're sort of the bar for proving persecution is incredibly high. And so people from Russia, for example, are forced to come largely to the United States. And that means that Immigration Equality, an organization that had been formed to work mostly on cases of same-sex partners of American citizens, and thought that its job was done with the June 2013 Windsor decision, which overturned DOMA and basically made same-sex marriage for the purposes of immigration, for federal government's purposes, legal. Immigration Equality, I think for probably about 5 minutes, thought that its job was done. Now it's overwhelmed with asylum cases from Russia. It's become its new profile. They've had to hire a full-time Russian paralegal, and they're still not keeping up with the cases. Other organizations have had to step in to provide legal assistance. But legal assistance, in a way, is the least of the problems that people face when they come to this country. Because of legislation passed in the 1990s, when people start seeking political asylum, and this legislation was passed during the Clinton administration to discourage people from seeking political asylum in this country. So it used to be that if you applied for asylum, that would make you eligible for public assistance. You basically had effectively interim status in this country. Now you can do nothing. You're not qualified for public assistance. New York City is one of the few places in the country that have been very good in circumventing some of those regulations and providing, for example, health insurance for asylum seekers and access to city services, but any services that get federal funding are not accessible to asylum seekers. So what that looks like, to give you an idea, is people come here on a tourist visa, and it takes them about 6 months to apply for asylum. And then after they apply for asylum, it takes them another 6 months before they can get a work permit. So for 1 calendar year, people are not only qualified for public assistance, but they can't even legally work. So what we're seeing are people who are getting work under the table and not getting paid, because what are they going to do about it? We're seeing people ending up on the street. We're seeing people who have been ending up in homeless shelters. And there's also something that we're not seeing. And what we're not seeing is the most vulnerable people coming to this country. The most vulnerable people are families with children. But of course, a family with children cannot, jump into the abyss and live in this, count on living in this country, having a place to live in this country, for at least a year before they even have a right to legally seek a job. Nobody's guaranteeing them a job, right? It's very difficult to find a job as an asylum seeker and as an immigrant in general, as somebody who's new to this job market. But so people with children are not coming, And people who don't have children are having an extremely hard time. And mostly what we're seeing is young men in couples or single young men coming because they can at least see their way clear to sleeping on somebody's couch for a year if they find a couch to sleep on. So what we really need, when people ask me, what can I do to help people in Russia? Well, I don't think anybody can do to help LGBT people in Russia until there is regime change. There are some incredibly brave activists in Russia. They're doing a great job. But for most people, the way to have any safety in their lives is to leave the country. And so what we need to be helping refugees, not just from Russia, from other countries as well. Russia just is the country that I'm talking about because I know it best, I know the situation best. But there are people coming from all over the world who are LGBT refugees, who need places to stay, who need help learning English, who need help getting settled, and who need ultimately a change in legislation or a change in the way that the State Department treats them so that they're immediately admitted to this country as refugees and then qualify for public assistance. And I will stop here and take questions. Thank you.
Masha, this is Oksana Wasylik from the University of Miami at Casper. Thank you so much for your very interesting speech. I have a question about, is there any organization that matches refugees from Russia or other countries with the families who are willing to take them for the time while they're seeking for their asylum? Thank you.
This is what we would like to have. It would be a pretty difficult thing to organize. We've been talking about organizing something like this, sort of a formalized network that would allow people to get matched for a couple of years. We're not there yet, unfortunately. There are a couple of organizations that help asylum seekers, and compared to what was happening a couple of years ago when this wave of asylum seekers began, I think there's a lot more information out there, and there are a lot more services. They're not adequate to the needs. We're still seeing people ending up in the streets. But there's an organization called RUSA LGBT, R-U-S-A LGBT, which works mostly in the New York area, but it also has ties to other organizations around the country. And that's where most people, that's the organization that most people get in touch with when they land in this country. There's an organization in Washington, D.C. called Spectrum, which does something similar, and started out matching people with housing, ran out of capacity very, very quickly, unfortunately. There's an organization on the West Coast, I don't know the name, but Rusa would definitely be able to tell you. There's also a national network of aid for asylum seekers, not just from Russia, but from all over the world, queer asylum seekers. It's called FEN, and it's an organization that's been trying to set up services, and that's a very good information resource for services available around the country.
Okay.
Other questions? Yes, over here.
You spoke of a number of examples of men who were being attacked in their own homes. Is that happening to lesbian women as well, or is it mostly just men?
That particular pattern has to do with meeting people online and bringing them, inviting them home or bringing them home, basically for anonymous or sex. That's never been particularly a practice among lesbians. So there seems to be, if there have been cases like that, they've been isolated. I'm not aware of any, but there isn't a pattern like that with lesbians that there is with gay men.
Some years ago, before the anti-gay movement began in Russia, the people who were dumped on and were the scapegoats were everyone from the South, right? Has is there a reason, a particular reason for shifts? Is it that there can be pushback from countries, but there can't be pushback from a country of gay people? Is there a particular reason that gay people become scapegoats in perhaps a more insidious and lasting way?
I think that may be the case. I mean, what was happening in Russia for about the first year after the anti-gay campaign began, in some ways resembled the Soviet Union during its anti-Semitic campaign. And especially, there's a wonderful book called When They Come For Us, We'll Be Gone, that documents the American campaign for Jewish emigration from the United States, including all these high-level negotiations that were happening between American officials and Soviet officials. And every time the American officials would bring up this issue of Jews not being allowed to leave, and the Soviet officials would say, why do you care? Why do you care about the Jews? But I think that 20 years later, or 30 years later, they had finally learned their lesson about the Jews, and they thought that maybe picking on the Jews or another ethnic minority was not such a great idea. But who was going to stand up for the gays? In fact, some countries have stood up for the gays. I mean, Russia has come in for a lot of international criticism over the anti-gay campaign. It has faded from public view, not in Russia, but it has faded from public view in the West because it's been overshadowed by Ukraine and then by Syria. We have sort of a one-track mind for understanding Russia's crimes, which is very unfortunate because all these things are connected. The anti-gay campaign is actually intimately connected to Ukraine, which is in turn connected to Syria, and understanding all that complexity would go a long way to understanding the situation we have internationally at the moment. But I think that's one of the reasons that the gays were chosen. Another is that it fits. I mean, it really sort of the sentiment that the Kremlin was going for, which is a shorthand for designating people as Western, as other, as imported, as forced upon us against our will. The queer designation worked best for that. Questions? Right here?
Let's have this be our last question.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just curious if there's a backlash from what I imagine is maybe the majority of queers in Russia against the people who brought this into the public sphere. Like, has that created a division within the queer world in Russia? So, like, the people who made this into a public issue, right? I mean, is there any of that sense of, oh, well, maybe they should have just been quiet, then everything would have been fine? Do you find that among anybody?
Well, if it exists, it's hard for me to imagine somebody actually saying that to my face, but no, seriously, the people who brought this into the public sphere are the people who are in the Kremlin, and I think people understand that. It's not that there was a huge gay rights movement in Russia and the Kremlin reacted to that. No. The queer movement in Russia has been largely a quiet community building movement, very inwardly oriented, not terribly public. Its biggest public events were these disparate pride marches in a couple of Russian cities. And film festivals, which are very much community events. And that's it. I mean, there was no public face of homosexuality except mine. And it's not, it's not that, I understand that the sort of the scheme you're imagining, that there was a huge push and then there was a backlash. That's what you would have in a democratic country. But in a country like Russia, you just have people in the Kremlin sort of picking a minority to scapegoat this particular year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Masha. If you guys want, I'm sorry to cut the question and answer short. We're setting up for a new event. If anyone wants to ask her questions, she'll be over there for a few minutes. And please make your way to the 1:15 sessions. We have concurrent sessions across